Hey friends, welcome to Haunted Bedtime. Before we get started, just a quick note. There are only a few ads during the first 15 minutes, and after that, it's completely ad-free. Just you and me. If you enjoy the calm vibes here, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely feels right to you. And I'd really love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Share it in the comments. It's always amazing to see how this little community connects people all around the world. I never planned on ending up on the streets when I was 16. I used to imagine all kinds of futures for myself, but none of them included sleeping outside in the cold or fighting every day just to stay alive. Still, that's where I ended up. I won't go into every detail of why I was thrown out of my house, because even now, it makes something inside me twist painfully. We didn't have much money, and my family was already falling apart in small, quiet ways long before I left. Mom and Dad wanted me to drop out of school and get a job. I wanted to stay in school and try for something better. Those arguments became our daily routine. And then I made the mistake of showing them a part of myself I should have kept hidden. I thought maybe they would accept me. I thought maybe, just once, I could be honest. But honesty cost me a home. Being on the streets wasn't better. I wasn't suddenly free or happy. But getting away from the toxic atmosphere of that house felt like being able to breathe for the first time in years. My town was big. There were kids everywhere, living on sidewalks, in alleys, under bridges, or curled up behind dumpsters. I wasn't alone, even though it felt like I was. At first, I tried to avoid actually being homeless. I spent the last of my cash staying in cheap hotels, bouncing from place to place, choosing between having a bed or having food. When my wallet finally ran dry, I had to face the truth. I was on my own. I hated the idea of asking for help. Asking the school felt humiliating. To me, it would mean admitting defeat. It would mean telling my teachers and friends what my parents had done. So I walked away instead. I dropped out of school and told myself I didn't care. Looking back, I know it was stupid. I should have gone to someone who could have helped me, even a little. But school never felt safe. Kids were bullied daily, and nothing changed. Teachers ignored it all. So I didn't expect anyone to care if I suddenly became homeless. Life on the streets wasn't some exciting adventure like the movies show. It was harsh and exhausting. But there was a strange sense of community too. The other kids living rough had been thrown away for the same reasons: abuse, poverty, parents who didn't care, or partners who hurt them. They became my closest thing to a family. We didn't always get along, and trust was dangerous. But we understood each other without speaking. I always laugh bitterly when I see TV shows painting homeless kids as clever pickpockets or charming street thieves. That wasn't us. Most of us were too scared to steal from actual people. If we saw something abandoned, we'd grab it, sure. But walking up to someone and taking their wallet? No way. We weren't brave. We were hungry. I eventually ended up on the south side of town, where a loose group of homeless kids stayed together for protection. Ben was our leader, older, smarter, and someone we trusted to keep the peace when things got bad. When Ben disappeared, everything started to fall apart. I didn't believe the rumors at first. Stories about a white van, a child catcher, someone hunting kids like animals. It sounded like something made up to scare us. But then Carly vanished. She was a street performer who always tried to earn enough to leave town. She sang under the bridge every day, her voice echoing across the cold stone like a warm light. She once gave me donuts someone had donated to her. She smiled like sunlight, even when she was freezing. And then one day, her spot was empty. Jason disappeared too. The weird kid with the eye patch who always hung around the music store asking for spare change. He annoyed me sometimes, but he talked to me when I felt invisible. He made me feel like I wasn't entirely alone. Seeing his purple hat missing from its usual place made something sink inside my chest. After them came more familiar faces, more kids who were here one moment and gone the next. Eventually, even Ben disappeared, and that's when the fear became real. The homeless shelter was the last place many of them had been seen. It was supposed to be safe. Warm food, coffee, a bathroom, maybe even a working shower if you were lucky. It wasn't perfect, but it kept us alive. Still, it became clear that someone was watching that place. Someone was choosing which kids to take. I kept returning anyway, because I needed somewhere to warm up, even briefly. Winter made every night painful. My fingers went numb so often I forgot what warmth felt like. My socks had holes, my shoes were barely holding together. The cold felt like it was inside my bones. I couldn't survive without at least a few minutes of heat from the shelter's broken heaters. But the shelter had its dangers too. Not just the kidnappings. Other kids could be cruel. I thought I had made allies. I thought I knew who I could trust. But I was wrong. My phone got stolen, then my shoes. People I shared food with turned on me. Growing up on the streets hardened me fast. So when Charlie approached me, I told him to screw off before he even opened his mouth. He was too clean-looking, too soft, too innocent. He had expensive clothes that would be stolen within minutes. His jacket alone looked like something from a wealthy suburban family. Kids like that didn't survive long out here. They were targets the second they stepped outside. He sat beside me anyway, smiling like an idiot, and I told him to take off his jacket because someone would steal it. He looked confused, like the idea had never even crossed his mind. He hesitated, then shoved it into his backpack just like I told him to. When he shivered violently afterward, I sighed and handed him one of my sweaters. He thanked me with genuine warmth, and that surprised me. Most kids would have tried to trade something or argue. Not Charlie. When he followed me outside, I thought he was just walking the same direction. But then he kept following me through back alleys and shortcuts only homeless kids used. He looked nervous, like he wanted to seem tough but didn't know how. Eventually, without either of us officially saying anything, he ended up staying with me. He rolled out his sleeping bag next to mine like it was the most normal thing in the world. Charlie became the closest thing I had to a friend. He was loud, annoying, always smiling, and far too hopeful. But he made me laugh. He made food appear somehow, pizza rolls, snacks, a can of soda. Every time I asked how he got them, he just shrugged like it was a secret joke I would eventually understand. He never shared his past, but he listened to mine. I didn't realize how much I talked about myself until I heard how one-sided it was. He never got upset, never complained. He just listened quietly, eyes bright, like he genuinely cared. One snowy day, the two of us sat on a wall watching a little girl make snow angels. He asked whether I believed in angels. I didn't. If angels were real, my parents wouldn't have thrown me out. God wouldn't have let me freeze on the street. Charlie rested his head on my shoulder, and I flinched away. His smile faded, and guilt hit me hard. Because I liked the warmth. I liked the feeling of someone leaning close. I had just been too scared to admit it. When I walked away to get some space, I told myself I'd apologize when I came back. But when I returned, Charlie was gone. At first, I thought he was getting food, but hours passed. Snow fell heavier, the sky darkened, and there was no sign of him. Panic clawed at me. I asked an old man nearby if he'd seen Charlie. He said Charlie had walked away with a man hours before. My stomach dropped like something inside me died. I ran everywhere. Our usual spots, the shelter, the alleys we used to sleep in. But Charlie wasn't anywhere. I refused to believe he had been taken. I waited for him night after night, but deep down, I knew he was gone like the others. A month later, when snow fell again, I thought I was hallucinating when I saw him standing in the middle of the road. Same jacket I told him to hide. Bigger frame, healthier, and smiling like no time had passed. I hugged him without thinking, relieved beyond words. But then I saw the iPhone poking from his pocket. Nothing about him made sense. Before I could ask anything, arms grabbed me from behind. A hand clamped over my mouth so hard I couldn't breathe. I was dragged through snow, thrown into a van, and locked inside behind metal shutters. I screamed for Charlie, and he answered. His voice was cold, unrecognizable. He apologized in a flat, casual tone, saying I had the perfect body for his father. He asked if we were still friends. His voice was playful, mocking, twisted. Hearing him made my blood turn to ice. When I finally looked around the van, I saw bodies piled on the floor. Kids with missing faces, skin falling off bone, rotting wings sewn into their backs like grotesque experiments. Ben was there, Carly, Jason, all of them dead. When the shutters opened, a woman smiled at me kindly while a man pointed a gun at my head. I was injected with something that paralyzed my body. They carried me like cargo. I woke later in a farmhouse tied to a surgical table. My back felt like it had been ripped open. I screamed until I passed out. I woke again to the sound of an argument between Charlie and his father. They called the mutilated kids angels. They called me the next one. Stitches held my skin together. Something under my flesh twitched like it was alive. Charlie eventually freed me and gave me my backpack, letting me escape like it was a game. I ran until I collapsed on a road, where a woman picked me up and tried to take me to safety. But I fled again, terrified anyone who touched me would discover what was inside me. Years passed. The pain in my back never went away. Sometimes I had to rip my stitches open to release whatever twitched beneath my skin. I tried to live a normal life. With help from my old teacher, Mrs. W., I went back to school, then college, got an apartment, and even met someone I loved. But my back never healed. Not fully. The thing sewn inside me never died. At 29, the pain became unbearable again. I started sleepwalking, waking up miles from my home with no memory of how I got there. One cold night at the train station, I saw a homeless girl and tried to help her. I looked away for 1 second, just one, and she disappeared. In the crowd, I saw a man dragging her away. Someone grabbed my shoulder. Charlie whispered in my ear, telling me she had the perfect shape for his father. I turned, and he was gone. On a nearby bench sat his old backpack, empty, left like a message. Street kids told me more had vanished, a girl and 3 guys. Charlie was back. He was taking more. And now I know that the only way to stop him is to find his father. Because if I don't, those kids will end up like Ben, Carly, Jason, and like me. I had an accident a few months ago that came disturbingly close to killing me. It still feels unreal when I think about it, like something that happened to someone else. I remember the night clearly because everything about it felt wrong from the moment I got into my car. It had been raining for hours, the kind of heavy rain that makes the world look blurry through the windshield. I was tired, alone, and just wanted to get home. The road was slick and dark, the streetlights stretching into long streaks across the wet pavement. I had been driving at about 80 miles an hour, which in hindsight was a stupid decision considering the weather. But at the time, I just wanted to get home faster. Then, without warning, my steering wheel jerked sharply to the right as if someone invisible had grabbed it out of my hands. Before I could process what was happening, the tires lost their grip and the car began sliding across the road. In the chaos, time suddenly stretched out. The world slowed so dramatically that I could see every tiny detail around me with unnerving clarity. The rain on my windshield looked like slow-moving glitter. The headlights of the oncoming cars seemed frozen in place. The sound of my own breathing echoed in my ears as my car drifted sideways at a terrifying speed. And ahead of me, growing larger with each passing millisecond, was the concrete barrier dividing the freeway. When the front of my car slammed into the barrier, everything snapped back to full speed. The world exploded into violent motion. The car lifted off the ground and began flipping, metal scraping against the asphalt, glass shattering, the roof crushing in. I felt myself thrown around inside the vehicle as it rolled again and again down the wet road. I remember the sickening weightlessness each time the car left the ground, followed by the impact when it hit the pavement again. It felt like being dropped repeatedly from a great height. Then there was silence. A strange, muffled silence where the world felt distant and muffled, like I was underwater. I don't know how long I stayed like that, half-conscious and barely aware of anything around me. The next thing I remembered was the flashing red lights of the ambulance and hands lifting me out of what was left of my car. I drifted in and out of consciousness as paramedics worked on me, their voices sharp but somehow far away. I felt pressure on my leg, a collar being fitted around my neck, and someone saying something about my pulse. It was all fragmented, like pieces of a dream I couldn't fully hold on to. When I finally woke up properly, I was lying in a hospital bed. every inch of my body aching. My right leg was encased in a cast, my left forearm was wrapped and braced, and my face felt raw from countless cuts and bruises. The doctors told me I had also suffered a spinal injury that they weren't sure I'd recover from. Their words were soft but carried a kind of heaviness, as if they were preparing me for the worst. I remember feeling fear coil inside me, wondering if I would ever walk again or return to my normal life. Recovery was hell. The pain was constant, sharp one day and dull the next, but always there. Physical therapy was worse. Every movement felt like I was being pulled apart, but I forced myself through it. Little by little, my body began to respond. I learned how to stand again, how to put weight on my leg, how to move without feeling like the world was shattering beneath me. And after months of hard work, sweat, and frustration, I walked out of that hospital stronger than I had been before the accident. The doctors were surprised. They hadn't expected such a full recovery. I felt proud, relieved, and unbelievably grateful. After that, I stopped driving entirely. The idea of getting behind a wheel again made something cold settle in my chest. So I walked everywhere instead. It felt peaceful. It made me feel alive in a way I hadn't before. One ordinary afternoon, I decided to walk to the corner store to buy a soda. It was a quiet day, the sun out, but not too bright, and the sidewalks were slick from a recent drizzle. As I made my way down the street, a woman and her young son were walking toward me. The boy couldn't have been older than 5. He was holding his mother's hand and carrying a small toy car in the other. At first, he didn't seem to notice me, but when his eyes finally lifted toward my face, he froze. His expression shifted in an instant, from calm to terrified. He looked at me as if he had just seen something impossible, something unnatural. His lower lip trembled. His eyes widened. His tiny hands tightened around his toy car. Then he stopped walking completely, causing his mother's arm to jerk backward as she was pulled off balance. She turned quickly, confused, and found her son standing rigid, staring at me with tears gathering in his eyes. I slowed my steps, confused myself, wondering if maybe I reminded him of someone, or if he was just frightened by my scars. But then the boy dropped his mother's hand and pressed both of his little palms over his face. He started to cry. First in small, quiet sobs, then louder, his whole body shaking with fear. His mother knelt beside him, trying to comfort him, running her hand gently across his back. She looked up at me apologetically, clearly embarrassed, and asked him what was wrong. "What happened, sweetheart? Why are you crying?" she asked softly. The boy lowered one of his hands, just enough to look at me again. His eyes were red and wet, and his voice cracked with raw fear when he spoke. He wasn't looking at his mother. He wasn't looking anywhere but straight into my eyes, as though he was seeing something inside me that I couldn't see myself. And then he whispered the words that made the world around me stop. He wasn't supposed to survive. For a moment, everything went still. The air seemed to vanish from my lungs. My heartbeat thudded painfully in my chest. The child's trembling voice echoed in my mind, replaying over and over again. I didn't know him. I had never seen him before in my life, but the way he said it, broken, frightened, certain, felt like a knife sliding slowly into my spine. His mother didn't understand what he meant. She assumed he was talking nonsense, just saying something strange like children sometimes do when they're upset. She picked him up, still comforting him, still unaware of the way his eyes stayed locked on mine, even as he buried his face in her shoulder. I stood frozen on the sidewalk long after they walked away. I kept hearing his voice. He wasn't supposed to survive. I didn't know what he meant. I still don't. But those words follow me everywhere now, whispering at the edges of my thoughts, reminding me of a truth I'm terrified to uncover. It was 4 years ago, back when I was still the kind of person who liked to stay up far too late scrolling through websites about strange creatures, mystery photographs, and eerie local legends. Every spare afternoon, I could be found in the tiny reference section of our town library, hunched over old photocopies that smelled of dust, tracing newspaper clippings with my finger. That is where I first read about the reports from Bodmin Moor. Over a century earlier, Farmers had awakened to find sheep, goats, and even fully grown cows mauled in ways no ordinary dog or fox could manage. Some mornings there were only deep claw gouges on gates or muddy paw prints larger than a human hand. And sometimes, according to the old stories, people vanished too. Journalists in the 1920s nicknamed the culprit the Beast of Bodmin. They described it in the florid style that made every line sound like the sleeve of a Gothic penny novel. A sleek black cat larger than any panther, a creature of silent nights and sudden screams, a shadow prowling through mist between granite tors. For months I pored over every line and let myself believe that an undiscovered species of big cat might still survive in a quiet patch of English wilderness. But then the library's archive ran dry, and modern sightings dwindled. The excitement faded. Revision for exams crowded in, then new friends, then new hobbies, and the moorland mystery was shoved into the same mental drawer as childhood ghost stories. I would have left the beast to molder there, half forgotten, if not for a camping trip that my parents and their longtime friends proposed during a warm spell late that summer. They wanted a weekend of fires, guitars, and simple food under the stars, and their invitation felt harmless until my friend Charlie mentioned in far too casual a tone that recent forestry work near his family's smallholding had revealed strange damage to trees at the edge of the old wood. We lived many counties away from Bodmin, yet something about deep claw marks 6 feet off the ground tugged the memory from its drawer. I joked that perhaps our local wildlife had finally found a new mascot. Charlie, older by a year and possessed of the sort of grin that makes even absurd statements feel plausible, announced that if the beast wanted to expand its territory, our parish offered plenty of sheep and chickens. Everybody laughed, and the talk moved on to shopping lists, tent poles, plaid blankets, and how many packets of marshmallows made the right ratio to bottles of lager. In daylight I laughed too, yet the warning curled around my mind's edge like black smoke. The field Charlie's family owned sloped gently from a country lane down toward a tangle of alder trees that shielded the roof of their cottage. A stream the width of 2 stride lengths wound through a shallow ditch at the bottom, dark with peat and bright where sunlight struck the surface. Charlie's mother kept a handful of hens in a movable coop, and 2 placid rescue ponies grazed beyond a wire fence. Flat space, running water, pleasant views, everything you could ask from a small private campsite. We unloaded our gear in the late afternoon, staked 3 tents in a loose semicircle around the fire pit my father dug with a spade, and as the sky blushed, we skewered sausages on green sticks and roasted them until the fat dripped and hissed on coals. If I squint, I can still see the exact positions. My younger brother, whom I will call Allie, poked the flames with a leg of fallen hawthorn. My mother sat cross-legged on a tartan rug, head tilted to catch every detail of Charlie's latest travel yarn. My father tipped paper cups of cider toward the adults whenever someone's drink sank low. The night air smelled of wood smoke and burning meat, and somewhere on the other side of the hedge a tawny owl repeated its hollow note, answered faintly by another farther off. Everything felt safe. Later, when we had coaxed the campfire to a red glow core, our parents unrolled thick sleeping mats in their larger tent, zippered themselves in, and left the younger crew to the low laughter that belongs only to teenagers sitting out under stars. We passed a guitar back and forth, strummed half of a popular riff, abandoned the song, tried another. Charlie swore he heard fox kits playing down near the stream. I craned my neck, but saw nothing except hedgerow shadows folded over themselves like blankets. Then Charlie said, "You know the maples out there have scratches higher than I can reach." He stood, stretched one arm, then mimed clawing the bark several inches above his fingertips. Deep ones too, almost through the sapwood. I had not drunk enough to dull my memory of the old newspaper lines. Peggy, ever the most jumpy among us, wrapped her arms around her knees. "Foxes don't climb that high," she said, attempting a light tone that fooled no one. "Maybe someone mistook a woodpecker's work for claws," Rosalind offered. "Woodpecker marks are tight, neat holes," Charlie replied. "These run vertical for almost 2 feet, 3 stripes each, like..." And he raked air again to demonstrate. Allie laughed to cover his nerves. "Or maybe you did it to spook tourists." Even through dim lantern light, I could see Charlie's expression turn earnest. I didn't. And I haven't shown anyone the main run yet. Thought I'd wait until daylight. They look fresher than the last time I checked. The conversation rolled on into increasingly ridiculous theories. Escaped circus leopards, mutated badgers, a prank by local kids with chisels, demonic goats. I pretended to smile at each suggestion, but the more Charlie insisted, the more tension soaked my muscles. I kept picturing glossy newspaper photos of ewes splayed in muddy fields, ribs bared, and farmers not grim faces beside captions that asked how a slash so deep could come from a native predator. My nerves hummed beneath my clothes. Finally, I pled tiredness and announced I would crawl into my tent. Ollie took the hint and scrambled after me. Inside our canvas shell, we unzipped sleeping bags and arranged pillows. Ollie asked if I believed Charlie's story. I said scratches were scratches. I would think about it in the morning. Ollie's eyes were large in the glow of his phone as he set an alarm for our planned dawn hike across the moor. We forced jokes about imaginary beasts wearing top hats until he drifted off first. The faint noise of the others talking seeped through thin fabric until it mixed with the rustle of grass outside and became an indistinct hush. Eventually, even that faded and sleep slipped over me. I woke from a dreamless blank to thick silence. My phone read 20-something, and my bladder insisted I deal with it. Cold air poured into the tent when I opened the flap. The fire had collapsed to a fan of glowing embers, and beyond that, the field melted into night. Only a sliver of moon hung low behind drifting cloud. I slid boots onto bare feet, grabbed the torch, and padded a short distance. The torch beam jittered on grass, picked out dew and the silver snag of a spider thread. Relief finished, I clicked the light off to save batteries, half enjoying the primal hush. The hedgerow's silhouette looked like serrated paper. An engine's distant hum reminded me that roads cut through moorland, even at 2 a.m. Then something flashed in the torch beam as I raised it again. 2 bright points, reflecting green-yellow, hovering a foot above the ground, then rising slowly until they were nearly at my shoulder level. In the space below those eyes, I saw ink-black, negative space, shaped like a cat's head, but larger than any feline I had ever seen outside a zoo. For a heartbeat, I thought Bella, my small white terrier, must have escaped her household by miracle and grown to monstrous size. That absurd notion lasted exactly the length of a single breath, until a low growl issued from the dark throat below those eyes, a resonant, trembling sound. Nothing like Bella's bark. The tone vibrated through bone. I fumbled for words and called what I thought was my dog's name anyway, some reflexive glitch. Bella? The growl grew deeper, rolled like distant thunder. A second set of eyes flared behind the first, higher still, then blinked out. I felt the prickle of hair lifting along my arms. I lunged back toward camp, half running, half falling, swept the torch ahead of me so its beam slewed dizzy arcs across damp grass. I dove through the tent opening, landing on Allie's legs. He jerked awake with a raw syllable of protest, but I clawed the zipper closed and grabbed his shoulders. He told me later I babbled nonsense, something about black shapes and eyes, while he tried to push me off and demand a reason for my midnight acrobatics. I remember only the roaring in my ears and the way my heart battered my ribs like a trapped bird. Allie subsided eventually, more from sleepiness than calm, and dozed again. I sat upright, knees drawn to chest, listening for any sound of movement outside. A wind rose, slid through dry grass, rattled the nylon wall. Embers popped. My breathing slowed. Half an hour, maybe more, passed without further growls, and a thin gray line of dawn began to seep into the weave of the tent fabric. I never managed full sleep again, but at the first rustle of adults stirring, I felt safer. Over breakfast, bright sunlight made everything seem harmless. I almost convinced myself fatigue had twisted a mundane shadow into monster proportions. I opened my mouth to confess nerves, but Charlie spoke first. He suggested a walk to the stone circles out on the open moor, then a visit to the scratch-marked trees if people felt brave. Allie tensed beside me. I forced a light laugh, but dread fizzed across my skin. We shouldered day packs and set off along a tractor track that narrowed into sheep paths winding between thorny tufts. Larks flitted over yellow gorse, and distant hills shimmered blue in heat haze, though it was barely mid-morning. We paused near a tall, standing stone, cracked through the center by ancient frost. Charlie's mother told us how Bronze Age communities used these as meeting points. My mind hovered above the conversation, replaying the torchlight eyes again and again. Charlie led us next across a shallow valley where bog cotton waved like scraps of forgotten paper, then up a slope until the woodland's edge rose ahead. Tree trunks crowded together, bark silver with lichen. Peggy pulled a face but followed. 10 minutes under the canopy brought us to a cluster of oaks thicker than gateposts. On half a dozen trunks, deep grooves ran vertical, 3 in each set, each groove roughly the width of my little finger. Some marks bled sap that glistened amber, others looked old and grayed. Charlie crouched to show fresh shavings at the base of one oak. "Only a couple of days old," he murmured. "Maybe last night." Ollie shivered. My legs itched to leave, but politeness made me linger while the others murmured theories. Memories of the torchlight encounter throbbed behind my eyes. I didn't want to appear childish, yet fear pooled inside me like cold water. Finally, I pulled my mother's sleeve. She saw my expression, glanced to Allie, and nodded. We announced we would head back early, citing hunger. The adults all planned to continue another loop. Charlie offered to walk us partway, but we insisted we'd be fine together. When we turned onto the main track, I felt muscles unclench. The midday sun painted the field an innocent gold when we reached camp. The tents sagged in lazy angles. We brewed instant soup on a small gas ring and ate silently. I considered telling Allie about the eyes, but decided against it. He was already unsettled. Heat made me drowsy. We dozed in shade until distant voices signaled the group's return. Afternoons slid toward evening in ordinary rhythms. We fetched more water, fried leftover sausages, kicked a football. Yet every note of bird call made me flinch. As dusk thickened, Allie and I exchanged unspoken agreement. We would share a tent again. I tried to appear cheerful during the second campfire, but my gaze kept drifting to the dark line where grass met trees. When the adults turned in, the younger group lingered half an hour. Charlie poured last dribbles of cider into tin mugs, apologized for frightening Peggy the previous night, then teased himself for letting old folklore color living memory. We doused embers and zipped our tents. Inside, Ollie rolled to face me. Moonlight through mesh cast pale rectangles on his hair. "You think something's really out there, don't you?" he whispered. "I'm not sure what I think," I answered. "But let's stay together, yeah?" He nodded. Sleep came quicker than the previous night. Exhaustion pummeled me down. At some hour deep between midnight and dawn, rustling jolted me awake. I lay rigid, breath held. Soft pads moved outside, circling tents. No metallic click of claws on road, only the hush of fur brushing grass. The sound passed the adults' shelter, skirted the low wall of cool ashes where the fire had burned, and halted right beside our thin canvas wall. Ollie stirred. I pressed a finger to his lips. The creature sniffed, long, measured inhales like bellows pulling air. It exhaled with a low rumble that vibrated the ground. Allie's eyes widened until whites showed. We stayed frozen, clutching sleeping bags. One sharp rasp sounded near the tent door, as though a rough tongue licked fabric. My pulse thundered. The tent cloth bulged inward gently as if something nosed it. The inner flap zipper shivered against its metal teeth. I imagined yellow eyes behind nylon, unblinking. Then, just as suddenly, the weight lifted. Pads retreated to grass, moved off. Minutes crawled. The sound faded toward the stream. A distant sheep bleated once, then silence re-knit the night. We didn't speak. Eventually, pre-dawn gray seeped into the tent. Birds started up. Ollie and I slithered out, crawled to the tap, field center, scanned every direction. Nothing stirred except early insects. A patch of flattened grass near our tent was the only proof something had stood there. When parents emerged yawning, they found 2 pale faces already packed, eager to get home. We loaded cars, making excuses about homework. Charlie looked puzzled but clasped my shoulder gently. He saw how my hands trembled. Back in my bedroom that evening, I listened from my window. The lane outside our house lay empty, hedges still. Then came the same soft thud-thud of large paws I had heard in the tent area outside, moving from one edge of my view to the other, doubling back as though pacing. Street lamps threw no feline outlines onto tarmac, only the swish of disturbed gravel, the faint scuff where something heavy turned. Every night for nearly 3 weeks it returned at roughly the same hour. I never summoned the nerve to open blinds wide, and perhaps that reluctance saved my wits. On the 22nd night the padding ceased. Dawn broke, birds sang, and normal noises reclaimed the lane. I have never heard those silent paws since. Perhaps the thing grew bored once it confirmed I meant no harm. Or perhaps it moved to territory deeper in countryside, where human scent thins. I cannot say. I only know I have never forgotten the shape crouched in my torchlight or the way it pressed canvas with curious intent instead of claws. I do not claim I met Bodman's legendary beast. My sighting occurred miles away, generations later. Yet something large, confident, and wholly untamed shared those nights with us. The marks on the oak trunks, the glow of green-gold eyes, the muscled shadow, these were real to my senses. Whether big cat, unknown canid, or relic of folklore given flesh, I'll leave to braver analysts. For me, the lesson lingers. Some corners of even familiar country hold secrets older than our property lines. Next time a friend invites me to camp near silent woods, I will remember to greet the dark with respect, listen for footfalls that leave no claw marks, and if necessary, keep stories like this alive, so others may tread lightly where wild hearts still roam. I grew up hearing this story in bits and pieces whenever my father felt like talking about his childhood, so I had time to stitch every detail together. He was only 12 and living on his grandfather's ranch, deep in a remote corner of northern Mexico that even today has more livestock trails than paved roads. The ranch itself lay in a shallow valley bordered by dark pines, with two narrow tracks leading out through tangled undergrowth. One track climbed a ridge and then dropped toward the market town. The other cut across a riverbed and ran northward in ruts and gullies until it met the highway. If you walked either road after sunset, forests pressed in on both sides. Thickets of mesquite and oak reduced moonlight to strips of silver. Frogs croaked in uncertain rhythm, and crickets filled every gap between footsteps with a restless metallic buzz. The adults said there were wildcats up in those hills, that coyotes slunk through dry ravines, that sometimes mule deer crashed through tangled brush when the wind turned cold. But the only threat my father believed in back then was a two-legged thief, hoping to cut wire fences and steal cattle. He spent that particular August evening at a birthday dance in a neighboring village, a place where adobe houses leaned together like old friends. Someone's cousin had lugged a battery-powered radio outside, that and one of the uncles poured rough mezcal into chipped enamel cups. My father and three boys of about the same age, Julian, Memo, and Gerardo, found a spot beneath a jacaranda tree where they traded jokes, kicked dust, and tried not to look like they were waiting for the brave girls to come ask them to dance. By the time the grown-ups decided the party was over, the music had drifted into static. The mezcal bottle was empty, and a gauzy film of cloud had smothered the moonlight. Someone checked a cheap wristwatch and discovered it was already after 2 in the morning. My father's grandfather had always been strict about curfews, so the boys slipped away from the flickering lanterns and headed for the main track that linked the villages, planning to hurry home before the old man woke for his dawn chores. They walked in single file along the edge of the road because summer rains had carved ruts down the middle, and the path fell gradually into deeper shadow as the last kerosene lamps disappeared behind them. Everything smelled of damp earth and crushed leaves. Every mile or so, the wind carried hints of distant water, letting them know they were moving toward the shallow stream that marked the edge of the ranch property. They talked less and less, partly because they were short of breath, nervous teenagers struggling to look cool even though the night felt heavier each time the clouds thickened, and partly because the hush of that hour made it seem disrespectful to laugh. The only light came from 2 pocket flashlights, Julian's, which flickered every other minute because the batteries were tired, and Gerardo's, which was stronger but threw a narrow beam that revealed little beyond the dusty path. My father kept staring into the black welter of branches overhead, convincing himself the leaves formed shapes, convincing himself those shapes were just clouds shadowing the treetops. He remembers that he was trying to work out whether the sky was clearing when he heard a cry so sharp it froze the group in mid-step. It floated out of the darkness on their right, just beyond a wall of thorny brush. At first it sounded like a small bird scolding from a nest, but almost immediately the pitch deepened, widened, became impossibly human, unmistakably infant. The wail rose and fell unsteadily, gasping as if whatever produced it was struggling for breath. The boy with the weak flashlight, Julian, swung the beam toward the trees, but the glare bounced off twisted trunks and revealed nothing except dense, restless shadows. No one spoke. They were village boys who had spent a lifetime hearing legends about babies abandoned in the wilderness because their mothers were too poor or too ashamed to keep them. They had heard grandmothers mutter prayers for torn-up souls that wandered after death. Like most children, they understood that grown-ups tucked warnings inside fairy tales, but they also knew that every now and then, fairy tales came sneaking into the world of fence posts and corrugated roofs. The cry sounded again, clearer. It was closer than before. This time it carried something ragged in the middle, a jagged clip, like fingers hurriedly scraping a wooden box, and the terror inside that sound pierced the spinnerets of each boy's imagination. They exchanged glances, measuring each other's fear. A sensible person might have hurried past, blocking the noise behind clenched teeth. But sensible boys do not always attend dances, do not always slip away with stolen cups of mezcal, do not always challenge moonless roads. Instead, all four stepped off the track as one, pushing through burrs and low branches with the irritability of people who are ashamed to be frightened. The beam from Gerardo's flashlight jittered across dead leaves, found nothing, then jerked upward to rake the canopy overhead. The crying ceased as abruptly as if someone had snapped a rope. Silence collapsed lightly upon them, but it was a silence so solid that every twig underfoot sounded like a hammer against slate. Julian whispered an obscenity that should have melted the darkness, yet nothing stirred beyond their breathing. They trudged another yard, swinging the flashlight in frantic arcs. Then the baby wailed again. This time the sound was behind them, back toward the road they had just left. My father turned toward it instinctively, but in the same instant, the three other boys lurched sideways, colliding with him in their panic. They did not know which direction was safe anymore. Each cry, now louder, now grotesquely broken, seemed to leapfrog through the brush, circling them like a bounding animal too quick to track. Once, twice, 3 times, they spun, flashlights slashing stripes across bark and thorns. Whenever they pinpointed one direction, the noise slid behind them, closer, as if a wounded infant were crawling circles at impossible speed. My father does not remember who ran first. He remembers only that suddenly his breath was scraping his throat in raw bursts, that dew-damp grass whipped against his calves, that branches snagged his shirt as he fought to reach the track. By the time he stumbled across the drainage ditch and up onto the roadside dust, 3 silhouettes pounded beside him. Julian clutching his dying flashlight, Gerardo white-knuckling his own beam, Memo wrestling free of a vine that had scored his hip through linen trousers. The road pointed home, and so they sprinted without further discussion. A grown man could have cleared that last mile in 10 or 12 minutes. A village boy who had been raised chasing goats should have done almost as well. But panic knotted their legs. They advanced in lurching bursts, periodically veering off the gravel shoulder whenever my father imagined he heard rustling in the grass, even though the only movements were his brother's boots kicking stones or Julian's flashlight flicking ominous shadows onto sagebrush. Yet the baby's screams were no longer darting through the forest behind them. The air hung sticky with a hush that suggested a predator catching its breath. Half an hour later, when the glow of lanterns finally winked at them from the ranch yard, the boys naturally assumed that safety lay in light, in walls, in the gare, hush of a family dozing behind shutters. So they paused, hands on knees, gasping with relief. In that space between one heartbeat and the next, the night itself seemed to shiver. It was as if the earth dark pressed a palm to its throat and intoned a feral order. Listen. Then, directly from the chaparral at my father's left elbow, a whine erupted. It was neither baby nor animal. It was a long, grieving vowel spun out to shattering, dipped midway and flung upward again, ending in a clipped bark that closed around the night like a clasp. My father says the sound cracked through him harder than the mezcal had burned earlier. The scream ignited some ancient spark in the marrow of every listening creature. Dogs in the villagers' courtyards hurled themselves at creaky gates. Horses stomped pasture dirt and blew fear into the fog. Roosters jerked awake, spurted nervous warnings, and then fell puzzled silent because the sun was nowhere near the horizon. My father felt all of it vibrating in his teeth. Before he remembered breathing, he was sprinting for his grandfather's house. He did not think about the others. He did not imagine their faces twisted in confusion or terror. He knew only that if he looked back, he might see whatever owned that voice, and to see it would be to surrender to it. Legs pumped, lungs punched at the chill air, arms flailed as he scaled the adobe wall and collapsed beside a clay flower pot. It is here, whenever he recalls the story, that he lowers his voice to a ragged whisper. The thing stopped where the road bent, he says. It stopped because the light, just the dim lantern light spilling out the kitchen window, stood between us. He claims that from the crooked gap in the wall he glimpsed a figure at the road's edge. Not an adult, not a child, but something wrong-shaped, hunched, a fluid silhouette, blacker than the shadow behind it. The body seemed to bow outward near the shoulders, as if ribs hinged loosely under too thin skin. He never saw a face. Flames in the farthest lantern jar flickered, spiders of brightness creeping across the ground. In the instant those yellow legs of fire touched the creature's feet, it vanished. No sprinting retreat, no struggling retreat through brambles, no wing beat, no skid in gravel. Gone, like mist on hot coals. He crawled inside, latched the door, and found that the other 3 boys were already huddled beside the ironwood stove, exchanging shuddering half-sentences. No one above the age of 16 believed them. His grandmother crossed herself, whispered that owls sometimes sound like dying infants. His uncle slapped the table and said, if the boys dared step foot at a grown-up dance again, he would whip each one. His grandfather filled a lantern and tramped out on the road, machete in hand, and annoyance in every step. He came back scowling because he found no tracks in the dust beside the ditch, found no blood or cloth that might explain the cries. Then he told the boys to get upstairs and sleep because dawn chores waited for no one. Sleep did not find them. My father says Julian lay whimpering, convinced they had heard La Llorona courting another victim. Memo pressed fingers into each ear and muttered the refrain of a local lullaby. Gerardo repeated, "A possum, it was just a possum," until his voice slurred into a dream. At first light, the rooster finally crowed on schedule. Wheezing relief settled their nerves, yet none dared glance out the loft window for fear that any shape, goat, dog, mule, might wear the memory of that voice. Nothing further happened that morning or the next. Chores consumed their muscles, and sun drowned terror in sweat. Yet the experience soldered itself into my father's memory. As years passed, he read every folkloric scrap he could find. Stories of creatures that mimic infants to lure travelers. Accounts of nahuales whose wails drive grown men insane. Tales of spirits trapped between baptism and burial. Some versions promised that carrying a crucifix would shield villagers. Others insisted salt thrown over the right shoulder while reciting the Apostles' Creed would send the demon shrieking back to its burrow. My grandmother found him poring over these pages one evening and scolded him for conjuring sin with idle curiosity. Decades later, while visiting relatives in that region, he drove the family truck past the old dance site. Asphalt had replaced gravel, and a cell tower stabbed the hillside, but the spread of forest looked unchanged, pines shoulder to shoulder, branches soaked in dusk. He realized that the ridgeline matched the map markings for a colonial mission abandoned in the 1830s, a place villagers once believed haunted by babies taken by fever. He parked on the shoulder, engine ticking, and listened for water slipping over pebbles in the stream below. Evening birds whistled. A pickup thundered past. No child's wail snagged the air. Still, when he returned to the city that night, he noticed his knuckles hurt from clenching the steering wheel. I visited that ranch only once as a child. By then, my great-grandparents were gone. The adobe walls had crumbled into nettles, and the corrugated roof sagged under clotted nests. I climbed the same stairs my father once fled and found the loft stripped bare, dust whirling in angular sun. On a whim, I crossed to the north window and pressed my forehead to warped glass. The road curved, dipping toward the stream, then rising away, exactly as he described. I imagined darkness flooding those trees, a lantern trembling against stone walls, 4 boys sprinting with fear sharpening every step. I imagined the hush after their door slammed, the hush that still roosted here decades later. A wind stroked pines somewhere on the ridge, but down in the valley nothing stirred. I closed the window carefully. My father does not often repeat the lesson he drew from that night. Once, after a family gathering, he sat beside me on the porch and watched shadows pool across the yard. He said that the world is wide enough to hold wonders and horrors in the very same acre, sometimes behind the very same leaf. He said that if you hear crying in the darkness, you should carry compassion for those who suffer, but also respect for the forces that shape sorrow into traps. He said that fear, when it arrives, will buckle your knees whether you believe in ghosts or not. Then he squeezed my shoulder as if testing whether I understood and slipped inside before the porch light attracted too many moths. I have heard dozens of ghost stories since then, from uncles who swear they glimpsed La Llorona drifting over irrigation canals, from cousins who heard hoofbeats on roofs at midnight, from truckers who vow a headless dog sprints beside their rigs on lonely highways. The skeptic in me dissects each tale, measuring probability against superstition. Yet when night folds itself thickly around my own porch and a stray cat cries down by the trash cans, a primitive hush glides through my blood. In that instant, I remember my father's story precisely as he felt it. A road framed by pine, the metallic scent of wet earth, a baby's voice elastic with anguish, and footsteps that might belong to an empty swing of darkness or to something clever enough to wear pain as bait. In that hush, I understand why 4 boys ran without daring to look back, and why, half a century later, one of them still measures every shadow he passes by the width of a scream he cannot forget. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I never imagined I would sit down and try to untangle every thread of the night that changed the way I feel about my family's folklore. Yet here I am, pressing each memory flat against the page as carefully as I can. It has taken weeks, maybe months, of replaying the same anxious questions, of worrying that someone will laugh the moment I reach the end, of deciding whether it is safer to keep silent or to risk admitting that the old stories might contain more truth than I ever believed. I keep reminding myself that the only way to know which memories are real is to examine them in the clearest possible light. So I will begin from the beginning, with the slow, ordinary details that seemed unimportant until the night they rearranged themselves into a shape I cannot escape. I was born in the United States, but both of my parents left Nicaragua in the 1990s. When their lives there had begun to feel unstable in ways large and small. They arrived here with the usual immigrant mixture of gratitude, exhaustion, and quiet longing for what they had left behind. Fragments of language, the taste of sorghum syrup at dawn, the smell of mango leaves boiling in the afternoon sun. They spoke English well, yet Spanish clothed the walls of our apartment whenever we were too tired to perform another language, or whenever my mother wanted to describe a spice that can only be named in one precise accent. The older I grew, the more I realized that my parents also carried an invisible trunk full of stories, beliefs passed down through generations, each one worn softer and thinner by repeated telling, yet still unbroken. One of those stories revolved around a creature my parents called El Duende. They disagreed about origins. My father said duendes were distant cousins of the fairies. Spanish colonists once believed danced along moonlit trails. My mother whispered that these were no fairies, that something older and hungrier than European folklore had borrowed the name. She described them as cleverly disguised spirits that crept out after dark, searching for children who misbehaved, luring them away from family, occasionally snipping a lock of hair as proof of mischief. In the daylight, I rolled my eyes, treating the legend as a parental scare tactic, like the bogeyman or Santa's naughty list. but the words lived somewhere beneath my ribs, curling quietly around each reprimand. If I neglected chores, my mother would sigh and say, "Acordate, mijo, el duende ve todo." Remember, my son, the duende sees everything. If I shouted at my father in a burst of teenage pride, he would mutter, "Cuidado, muchacho. No quieres que un duende te lleve por desobediente." Careful, boy. You don't want a duende to take you because you can't behave. I had heard those warnings so often that they lost their punch. By the time I turned 18 and towered over both parents, I believed I had aged out of such childish threats. I accepted a part-time job working afternoons at a hardware store, packed my weekends with pickup basketball, and began to imagine college applications as passports to a life where ancient forest tricksters could never find me. The disconnect between my parents' inherited caution and my own 21st century skepticism felt like just another sign that time moves forward, not backward. That complacent certainty dissolved one Thursday night, shortly after my 19th birthday. I remember the date only because I had spent the afternoon finishing a world history essay that was due the next morning. The weather that week had been on a seesaw between late winter chill and early spring humidity. By nightfall, the air settled somewhere warm enough to encourage open windows. I showered around 10 o'clock, letting steam chase away the pages of footnotes still crammed behind my eyes. Afterward, I devoured the plate of gallo pinto my mother left on the stove, carried a mug of chamomile tea to my room, and locked the door behind me. An act that felt more symbolic than necessary, considering our neighborhood rarely saw trouble worse than rowdy high schoolers carousing 3 blocks away. My bedroom reflected the contradictions of any 19-year-old who has not quite decided which aspects of childhood to box up. One side of the dresser displayed my battered Nintendo Switch, a row of half-heartedly organized textbooks, and a tangle of charging cables. Opposite that, a glass shelf showcasing miniature clay jaguars and woven palm bracelets my grandmother had mailed from Leon over the years. On the floor beside my bed, a scrawny black cat named Bento stretched out on a faded soccer jersey. Bento is the sort of cat who drifts in and out of human contact on his own schedule, aloof until he wants heat, then suddenly pressing every bony vertebra into my side as if weaving himself into the mattress. I swear the moment I shut the bedroom door, Bento leapt onto the quilt, kneaded a spot near my hip, and began to purr with the heavy buzz of a tired diesel engine. His warmth covered the last shreds of stress like a wool blanket. I flicked off the ceiling light, leaving the room illuminated only by the blue glow of my phone. The digital clock read 10:38. I planned to exchange a few text messages with friends, skim the first page of tomorrow's reading assignment, and call it a night. As always, my lanky frame fit awkwardly against the twin mattress. My heels dangled an inch or two beyond the edge, toes grazing cool night air. I pulled the quilt higher over my shoulders, tricked myself into thinking that I could capture warmth in those few extra inches. Parallel text conversations bloomed across the screen. In one, I teased an old classmate about her new haircut. In another, I traded memes with my best friend from geometry. Whenever the phone buzzed, Bento's ear flicked, yet he barely lifted his head. I liked knowing he was there, an easy witness to the ordinariness of the moment. At 11:02, I decided I was done with electronic lights, so I typed a final goodnight and set the phone, screen down on the bedside table. Bento grumbled but did not protest when I shifted him enough to slide my arm under the pillow. The ceiling above looked darker than usual, probably because the blinds remained lowered. I hadn't felt like adjusting them after the shower. I had drifted into that pre-dream fog where thoughts no longer align into logic when something in the room clicked. I mean that literally. My floorboard emitted a sharp pop. Old houses creak and settle, but each dwelling has its own vocabulary of groans. Normally I could name most of them. This noise sat outside the usual grammar. A second later, a quieter creak answered, as if another plank tested my weight, though I lay perfectly still. In response, my brain offered rational explanations. Wood expands as temperatures change. Perhaps the HVAC kicked on, pushing warm air beneath floor joists. I reminded myself that houses speak in minor rumbles. So I slid a hand across the quilt, found Bento's fur still ruffled in a lazy pose, and let my eyelids droop again. That is when Bento hissed. Not the offended hiss that means stop poking me. This sound emerged from deeper in his throat, an electric coil winding tight. He sprang upright, an easy feat despite his narrow shoulders, and arched into a crescent that bristled all along his spine. In the dimness, I could barely see his silhouette, but I heard paws shuffle across sheets. He aimed the hiss somewhere toward the foot of the bed, toward the door, maybe beyond. His pupils likely ballooned, taking in more gloom than my human sight could. I whispered his name, expecting him to knead the blanket again. Instead, he growled, that low moaning note cats use when acknowledging another predator's presence. Instinct lurched awake under my ribs. I fumbled for the phone, flipped it upright, and jabbed the side button until the flashlight burst on. The sudden column of white light sliced through the darkness. It carved a neat path between my chest and the far wall, revealing scuffed hardwood, a sliver of dresser leg, the closed door. Nothing else. Yet Bento remained crouched, ears pinned. He tracked something with a small, jerky motion, eyes following left, then right. As the beam passed over my sock drawer mirror, the reflection threw light down onto the quilt, and I caught myself flinching as if expecting a shadow to materialize. When none did, I turned the phone toward the closet door. Its wooden slats glinted dully. I quickly turned the light beneath the bed, illuminating dust bunnies and an old pair of sneakers, but no sign of a mouse or cockroach or intruding pet. In that moment, Bento made a sound I had never heard, a yowl thin as wire, sharp enough that it vibrated in the bones of my inner ear. He sprang from the mattress, claws catching the quilt. His hind legs skipped against the footboard, and he darted out the narrow gap between my ankle and the wall. The phone nearly slipped from my palm as I yanked my feet inward, afraid of crushing him. But he bypassed me entirely, bolting toward the far corner of the room, toward the closet door, where he stopped so violently his back claws scraped wood. He faced the wall, tail flicking in the rigid cadence of feline doom. Another hiss, another growl. I would love to claim my next move involved courage, but I was too busy trying to keep my pulse from leaking out my fingertips. It did not feel like normal fear, more like the sensation of standing ankle-deep in the surf during a storm, knowing the waves could topple me if they swelled half an inch higher. Still gripping the phone, I captured enough air to breathe, then slid off the side of the bed opposite Bento. I reached the wall switch and flicked it. Yellow light brimmed overhead, flooding every nook my phone's flashlight could not reach. The incandescent brightness washed away the tunnel vision of panic. Instantly, Bento's posture slackened. His back lowered, tail drooped, shoulders relaxed. He turned, shook a rear paw as though maltreated, and trotted back toward me, brushing my shin in a drive-by gesture that felt almost apologetic. He hopped onto the bed again, curled in the crater his exit left, and licked the inside of one leg. He gave no further sign of alarm, but I remained upright, scanning corners that revealed only geometry and dust motes. The closet door stood closed. The blinds remained lowered. My computer's idle light glowed faintly. Nothing indicated intrusion. I waited for Bento to resume purring. When he did, soft, rhythmic vibrations, I concluded the cat had been spooked by an insect that darted out of nowhere. Maybe a fly buzzed through the room and vanished before my light reached it. Maybe a moth battered the blinds. The time on my phone read 11:16. I exhaled, found the light too garish for sleep, so I turned it off. In the brief silence afterward, I could hear my mother washing a final dish downstairs, water clinking against porcelain. Life sounded normal again. I lowered onto the mattress, tucked the quilt around my shoulders, and buried my face in the pillow's worn cotton. If I had fallen asleep that minute, nothing else might have happened. Yet as drowsiness crept back, another sound infiltrated my consciousness. A new creak, softer than the first. Bento did not hiss, did not tense. Perhaps he slumbered already. But I recognized the pressure of a floorboard yielding beneath light weight. This time, it came from the left side of the bed, near the foot where my toes often dangled. The space looked empty, and though my hearing strained, I detected no breathing, no scuttle of mouse claws. Could timber really settle twice within 20 minutes? Could the house still be flexing from the day's humidity? I thought about opening the blinds to let street light in, but the fear of glimpsing my reflection, and perhaps something else behind it, kept my hand on the quilt. So I stretched my legs under the covers, curling my toes away from the mattress edge, as if a childhood reflex to monsters might serve me well now. Eventually, my eyelids wobbled shut again. What woke me next was not a creak or hiss. It was an abrupt chill that pricked my face and throat. Air, crisp enough to remind me of approaching spring, wafted across the room as though someone had cracked a window. My eyes snapped open. Street lamps cast weak orange stripes through the blinds. Those slats were no longer fully closed. Worse, one of the actual windows, the small casement above my desk, rested wide open. Sash tilted inward, despite the fact I distinctly remembered locking it earlier. A small square of screen kept insects at bay, but I stared past that mesh into night. Chills crowded the spaces between my vertebrae. For a handful of seconds, reasoning seemed impossible, as though grammar itself had fled. I swung my feet onto the floor and listened hard. If a burglar had pried the window, my parents would be rustling downstairs, cursing in Spanish, grabbing phones. Yet the house lay still. Then I thought of Bento. He remained curled tight at the hollow my hips left in the mattress, but a low tremor shivered his flank. He was not asleep. His ears lay flat, but his eyes, black around pinprick irises, pointed directly at the foot of the bed. I looked there. At first, nothing resolved beyond the gloom. Then a shape edged forward under the quilt, drawing a small mound in the comforter, as though an invisible palm pressed upward against cloth. The quilt puckered, rose half an inch, subsided. Stab of shock froze me. I considered springing back on the mattress, but the rational part of my mind insisted it must be Bento's tail trapped under a corner of fabric, except Bento still crouched by the pillow. No tail stretched that far. The mound flattened. I scanned the floor and walls for movement. Nothing. I stepped to the window, yanked it shut with a clap that jolted my heart. The latch clicked. I spun, expecting the quilt to writhe again, but the surface remained placid. By then, adrenaline had made my hands quake. I reached for the phone light once more. The beam carved open every shadow: chair, sneakers, stray homework papers, nightstand. Each revealed itself ordinary. When the beam slanted back to the bed, Bento leapt away from my pillow, charged across the mattress, and scrambled under the dresser. His tail struck the hardwood like a restless python. He fixated on the narrow gap below the blanket's dangling edge. In the beating hush that followed, I remembered every bedtime lecture about duendes. The warnings flared across childhood memory. They prowl unseen. They imitate familiar noises, footsteps, murmurs, baby cries, until you investigate. Then they steal what matters most. Sometimes it is a newborn's laughter. Sometimes it is a child's obedience. Sometimes, if no one stops them, they steal the child forever. I used to scoff at that logic. Now, my pulse throbbed against ribs like small fists. I felt two options sprout in my mind. Option 1. Fling the door open, run for my father's room, shake him awake, endure his frown, then drag him back to search the floorboards. Option 2. Stay frozen. Hope morning light banishes illusions. Pretend this night never existed. I hovered between them until a third option shoved itself forward, something unplanned, unpracticed. I whispered in Spanish, "Quien anda ali?" Who goes there? The phrase sounded silly the moment it left my dryness-coated lips. Why ask shadows for identification? An answering silence expanded so wide it seemed to press against my skull. Then, impossibly, 3 small knocks tapped under the bed. Wood on wood, knuckle or claw, each rap separated by the length of a single breath. Not frantic, deliberate, perhaps even amused. Bento's tail thrashed. I did not scream, but my mouth parted in terror. I wanted to leap onto the mattress and drag it across the room, wedge the headboard between me and whatever crouched beneath. Instead, I backed 2 paces, eyes fixed on the bed skirt. One thin strip of quilt still pooled against the floor, motionless. One tangle of sheet edges lay limp. The entire world balanced on whether those folds would stir again. Somewhere outside my room, plumbing rattled, the furnace kicking on, maybe the water heater refilling. That small routine noise offered anchor. The knocks did not repeat. After 20 seconds, the vacuum in my lungs released its hold. I found myself inhaling a breath so long it tasted dizzy with relief. I dared not bend down to look under the mattress. Even I was not so foolish. But I inched forward, gripping the flashlight on my phone with whitened knuckles, leaned across the corner of the bed and seized Bento's scruff. He yowled once, then let himself be hoisted to my chest. His claws pricked through my t-shirt as I stepped backward. Never taking my gaze off the blank space under the bureau, I navigated sideways until I reached the door. I twisted the knob with entire body caution, pulled the door wide, and stepped into the hall. Light flooded from the bathroom night bulb down the corridor. I kicked the door shut harder than necessary, then jogged to my parents' room, heart messing up its count. My mother opened the door before I even knocked. Maybe the slam or Bento's shriek had alerted her, and she saw in one glance that something bigger than teenage drama sat behind my eyes. She asked nothing. She merely opened her arms. I shoved the cat into my father's half-awake grip, curled into my mother's shawl like a younger version of myself, and felt heat saturate the cold rivulets beneath my skin. I slept on their bedroom floor that night. Bento stalked circles at the foot of the bed for an hour, sniffing corners, then settled on top of my makeshift blanket. Morning arrived, gray and ordinary. At breakfast, I told my parents that a window latch must have slipped, that Bento chased something and panicked. I told half-truths because the whole picture sounded deranged. Who in rational daylight believes in nursery-snatching sprites? My father replaced the old sash lock with a modern one from the hardware store. Bento's interest in my room dwindled. He preferred the living room sofa anyway. I returned to school routines, but each evening before bed I checked every window twice, inspected floorboards, straightened the quilt so no extra fabric brushed the ground. I left a small LED lamp burning on the desk. Sometimes I woke minutes before dawn, certain I'd heard a measured tap, 3 short raps, fading into memory too quick to confirm. At such times, I whispered a childhood prayer my grandmother taught me, Ángel de mi guarda, and tried to swallow the thick pulse in my throat. Weeks later, when courage felt marginally stronger than embarrassment, I searched Spanish-language forums about duendes. Many claimed these beings could enter homes through half-open windows, or slip beneath door gaps no thicker than a pencil. Some said cats can sense their presence moments before humans notice them. One elderly poster described the knock, tres golpecitos, como si dijeran, aquí estoy, préstame atención. 3 little taps, as if they said, here I am, pay attention. Another insisted that once a duende found your fear, it returned until you confronted the lesson it meant to teach. I closed the browser, shivered, opened it again. Today, I still do not know whether what visited me was a duende, a malicious spirit, or some unfathomable quirk of a half-awake brain and a reactive cat. I know only how real the cold air felt on my cheeks, how deliberate the open window looked, how carefully those 3 knocks paced themselves beneath my bed. I no longer laugh when my mother says old stories hold warnings. I keep my room uncluttered now, lock windows even in July, and leave a glass of water near the sill. An offering, some say, that tells wandering spirits you respect the doorway between their realm and ours. If skepticism is the armor we wear through adulthood, sometimes the unseen world finds a seam and slips its blade between plates. I remember that as I triple-check my latch each night. Then I stroke Bento's back until his purr steadies my breath. Only when his eyes half close, signaling trust that the room is quiet for now, do I dare extinguish the light and let darkness scan my walls, listening for footsteps thinner than memory. I have tried to tell myself 100 different ways that the night I remember was only a nightmare, some trick of exhaustion and an overactive imagination. Even now, more than a decade later, I still rehearse that excuse whenever a friend asks why I keep the curtains drawn and the lamp burning until dawn. I tell them I am a light sleeper, or that the noise from the street makes me nervous. I smile and change the subject. I almost never admit that the real reason I cannot sleep in complete darkness goes back to a single weekend on my relative's farm. A weekend that unfolded when I was barely old enough to question what was real and what was folklore. My parents were, and still are, hard-working people who loved every chance they got to take my younger brothers and me out of the city. My father's cousin, a stocky man everyone called Tio Polo, ran a modest property on the edge of the mountains. He grew guayaba, a bittersweet fruit that attracts flocks of bright green parrots whenever the branches bend with ripeness. The orchard itself sat behind an old adobe structure that, according to neighborhood gossip, had once been a Jesuit storehouse and later a ramshackle hideout for smugglers. Whether or not that history was true, the building had been abandoned long before I was born, and its sagging walls and half-collapsed roof looked like the sort of place bats and spiders sign property deeds in blood. Older cousins swore the place was haunted, though no one could name the exact ghost. They only said that after dark, you could hear things moving through the hollow halls, things bigger than rats, but quieter than thieves. When my father announced we would spend an entire weekend at Polo's, I clapped so loudly my palms stung. For me, the farm was a paradise. Fields of waving grass, a muddy stream, a barn that smelled of sun-warmed hay and horse sweat, and, most important, 2 guayaba trees planted just far enough apart that their branches intertwined. My cousins and I had learned to climb those trunks like squirrels, scrambling high until we could bounce on the thinner limbs and pretend we were sailing above an emerald ocean. On that particular visit, even more excitement waited. A family from the next valley had promised to drive over with children my exact age, and I imagined fresh faces ready to chase new games across acres of green. We arrived late on a Friday, just before the sky extinguished its last caramel light. Polo's house looked as small and neat as ever. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with clay brick walls, a single bathroom at the end of a narrow hallway. Beside the house stretched a rough dirt lane, wide enough for a truck, dusty enough to coat your nostrils if the wind shifted the wrong way. That lane served as the artery connecting Polo's fields to other farms hidden among gentle hills. I believed that if you followed the ruts long enough, you would eventually find another lively kitchen, another cousin waving hello. While the adults hauled suitcases indoors, I tossed a backpack onto the porch, filled my lungs with the smell of freshly turned soil, and bolted toward the lane. The evening air folded around me, soft and boring only to people who had never spent their childhood searching for toads between rows of onion plants. At the first bend in the road, I spotted dust spiraling upward, evidence of an approaching pickup. I jogged closer until the headlights revealed 2 boys and a girl perched in the truck bed. After quick introductions, I learned their names. Luis, 11, with a freckled nose, Solange, 9, who wore a bright scarf, and Javier, a lanky 12-year-old who proudly announced he had already mastered the slingshot. Without wasting time, we scattered into the grove of guayaba trees, racing to see who could reach the highest branch before dinner. We played until the farm bell clanged. Polo's wife, Tia Esther, had prepared enormous platters of rice, black beans, and roasted chicken, seasoned with lemon. The adults sat on the porch, telling stories over steaming plates. We children filled our stomachs and then sprawled on the packed earth patio, craning our necks toward pinprick constellations slowly sharpening against a darkening sky. By 8 o'clock, the younger kids were yawning, but I was wide awake, my body still humming from tree climbing and the possibility of more adventure. At 9, we were instructed to wash our faces and crawl into sleeping bags. The house had only 3 rooms, so we arranged ourselves wherever floor space allowed. The youngest children in the spare bedroom, the teenagers on the living room rug, my parents in the main bedroom, and me, because I begged, to share the double bed with my mother. Somehow my determination not to sleep surrendered to the lullaby of cicadas, and I drifted off. The next moment of clear memory is the voice of full darkness. A wash of cold air slid across my ankle. In the hush, I heard Polo's rooster shift on its perch. At first I thought I must have dreamt the chill, yet I felt a tug in my bladder that meant only one thing: either rush to the bathroom or risk humiliating myself in front of cousins who would never let me forget. Groaning silently, I sat up, careful not to rouse my mother. The bedroom door squeaked open under my careful grip. As any child raised on a farm knows, indoor lights at midnight feel like sirens announcing that someone is awake. I chose instead to shuffle through the narrow hall, letting moonlight guide me. At the bathroom door, my toe found a squealing floorboard. I paused, listening for footsteps from curious relatives. None came. I completed my mission quickly, fingered the rusty sink tap to rinse my hands, and prepared to navigate back through the moonlit tunnel. Halfway along the corridor, a fragment of memory spoke, the old adobe storehouse. Earlier that evening, Solange had asked if we children might explore it tomorrow. Polo warned us to stay away, insisting the structure could collapse under our weight. Someone joked it was not the building we should fear, but whatever spirit hovered inside. The adults laughed, yet a flicker of unease crossed my mother's eyes. I recognized that flicker now as I stood in pitch-dark air. The mention of haunting had not frightened me at dinner. Now, a prickling traveled up my spine as if tiny magnets beneath the skin were rearranging. I inhaled and caught an odor unfamiliar inside Polo's house, the raw smell of wet clay and something musky, animal yet not entirely. My chest tightened. That was when I heard the floorboard creak behind me. I spun. My eyes registered nothing but hallway gloom, a rectangle of deeper shadow that ended at the living room arch. I convinced myself the wood had shifted under its own age, but the smell thickened, earth and rotten berries. Another board groaned closer than before, followed by a muffled scrape like claws or nails grazing dust. Every lesson my parents ever gave about good manners, boys do not run inside, boys do not wake adults for trifles, dropped away. I burst down the remaining 3 paces, flung the bedroom door wide, and dove onto the mattress. My mother muttered in her sleep, perhaps sensing the shake. I squeezed my eyes shut, convincing myself that with quilt up to my chin, I was invisible. Minutes ticked. Nothing else moved. Eventually, the pounding in my ears eased enough that I began to believe embarrassment was the only danger I faced. Then the growl began. It leaked through the cracks of the wall the way cold seeps under doors, a low reverberation that lodged in bone. I had grown up around cows, pigs, even the occasional feral dog, and nothing those animals produced sounded like this. The noise was not loud, it was deliberate, as though the creature wielded its voice with surgical restraint. I felt the vibration more than heard it, a slow thunder that mapped every rib. I wanted to shake my mother awake, but fear pinned my arms. Almost as soon as it began, the growl faded, replaced by quick taps against the exterior wall as if something paced outside the window. Moonlight cast faint lines across the floor, and in one easy motion I reached for the curtain cord, meaning to yank it down. My hand froze midair. Beyond the pane floated 2 eyes, impossibly large, burning crimson as hot embers. They hovered at a height no dog could claim, too wide apart for human or goat. I could not see the creature's outline, only the eyes and a suggestion of darker black around them, a silhouette that absorbed the lesser night. My mind flipped through memory, seeking an explanation. Reflection of taillights, but no vehicles were near. Red LEDs from farm machinery. Polo kept tractors locked in the shed 100 meters away. My heart beat so hard my teeth ached. The eyes narrowed, and the glass fogged where invisible breath licked the pane. A second sound swelled, a snarl of satisfaction. I could not parse emotion in that depth of resonance. All I understood was primal directive, do not move. Time fractured. Seconds might have stretched into hours if not for a sudden clatter from the kitchen, pots rattling as if someone bumped them. The crimson orbs flicked sideways, distracted. I seized the brake. Blanket still clutched to my chest. I rolled off the far side of the bed, landed hard on knees, and crawled beneath the heavy wooden frame. Dust scratched my throat. I waited. I listened. No footfalls on patio stones, no scrape of claws on glass. Silence reigned except for the steady breathing of my mother above. Eventually, trembling muscles forced me to shift. When I risked peeking skyward, the window showed nothing but faint starlight. The eyes, whatever bore them, had withdrawn. Nevertheless, I remained under the bed until dawn smeared gray on the curtain. Only then did I rise, wrap my arms around the curtain rod, and pull extra cloth across every sliver of glass. My mother stirred, murmur asked if I felt cold. I muttered something about a draft. She drifted back to sleep. Any hope that daylight would erase the specter vanished after breakfast. The youngest cousin came racing from the barn, tears streaking his cheeks, shouting for the adults. Tia Esther rushed outside. Moments later, her scream cut the air. We followed the noise until we found her kneeling near the chicken coop. 5 geese lay motionless, white feathers matted red. Each bird displayed terrific puncture wounds at the neck, as if speared by a narrow, lethal tool. My father examined one carcass, then the fence. A section of metal mesh hung bent outward as though flung from within. No coyote, he said, mangles wire that high off the ground. I glanced toward the orchard. The twin guayaba trees, the ones we had climbed, now sported deep gashes carving through bark 5 feet above ground. Sap glistened along fresh wood. I remembered the red eyes, the breath curling against glass. I remembered the horse the evening before, its sudden panic as I approached the abandoned adobe building. As adults debated which predator might do such damage, I lifted my gaze toward the distant ridge, where guayaba gave way to thin forest. I half expected to see crimson points blinking from shade. We left the farm before night returned. On the drive home, my father instructed us not to repeat rumors of monstrous animals. Farmers did not need more fear. In my head, I swore to bury the memory. Yet for years afterward, the image returned uninvited. 2 glowing holes floating outside a humble window, promising that whatever boundaries humans build, fences, locks, curtains, some creatures consider invitations instead of barriers. I am 27 now. My apartment overlooks a lively street, and most nights the neon signs and traffic headlights pour enough brightness through blinds that I cannot pretend the world is cost-free shadows. Even so, I draw heavy curtains closed and leave the desk lamp glowing. I tell visitors the light eases me awake for early shifts. Only Bento, the black cat I adopted as soon as I could afford pet fees, knows the real reason. When he curls beside me, warmth buzzing through fur, I remember the farm's restless night, the chicken coop at dawn, and the shriveled hush that preceded a growl. I stroke Bento's flank until he purrs himself to sleep, silently thanking mundane domestic rituals for the fragile spell they cast. But every once in a while, when the wind scuffs tree branches against my building, I hear that deeper vibration beneath ordinary sounds, and I picture red eyes watching from a window no curtain can hide. In those moments, the old terror returns, cold as river stone, urging me to keep lights burning until morning reminds me I am safe, at least until darkness argues otherwise. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I still remember our Washington trip with an almost photographic clarity. Not because it was a glamorous vacation or filled with postcard scenery, though the lake was beautiful, but because of what happened on the second night. An experience that has remained my private, unnerving secret for years. Since that August evening back in 2016, I have replayed every minute in my mind, trying to decide whether I made a string of foolish choices, whether something truly uncanny prowled the dark, or whether the truth lies somewhere in between. I suppose writing it all down is my way of taking stock, testing my memory against daylight logic. So here it is exactly as I recall, in full, unvarnished detail. Jeff, Gary, and I were 18, nearly 19 that summer. We had graduated a couple of months earlier, and were each staring down one kind of transition or another. Jeff planned to start community college in the fall. Gary had lined up a job as a welder's apprentice, and I was sticking around home saving tuition money and trying to decide whether to join the Marines or enroll in a university the next year. We figured a week in a quiet spot beside a lake would be the perfect last hurrah before adult life launched its barrage of schedules and obligations. Jeff's grandparents owned a modest A-frame cabin on a parcel of wooded property not far from the Canadian border, a place the whole family simply called the Lake House. The house sat near a long, curving shoreline reached by a winding gravel road with few neighbors. The property included a short dock, a 20-foot fishing boat, a ramshackle hammock strung between 2 firsts, and an old 4-person canvas tent that lived most of the year in a garden shed. Jeff's grandparents used the place primarily in early June and late September for steelhead season. Otherwise, it was empty, a little dusty, but perfectly comfortable for 3 late teenage guys who were more interested in fishing, hiking, and drinking convenience store beer than complaining that the Wi-Fi was non-existent. Jeff's grandparents would not arrive until the second morning, so our first 24 hours were entirely unsupervised, something we treated with the same gleeful irresponsibility that had defined our final semester of high school. Even the 6-hour drive from Spokane set the tone. Loud music, arguments over who lost the auxiliary cord privileges when Jeff dropped his phone beside a waterfall during a pit stop, half a case of energy drinks, and one questionable gas station burrito that became a running joke the rest of the week. By late afternoon, we rolled down the cabin's narrow driveway, dust pluming behind the SUV. The trees opened onto the gravel parking patch where the house squatted, cedar shingles faded silver, windows reflecting a broad, glass-smooth lake. The air smelled of pine resin and warm mud rising from the shallows. We piled out laughing, stretching, claiming bedrooms, even though we would end up draped over couches and recliners in typical bachelor comfort. Our first evening ran exactly as you would expect. Sandwiches, a couple of hours of mindless reality TV, and then a chilly Lake Washington swim under a pink horizon. By 10:30 p.m., we were toweling off and swearing we could see constellations we never noticed back in City Glow. That first night, I convinced myself to sleep outdoors. It sounds romantic, kid under the stars, listening to fish ripple at the surface, but my motive was half practical, half sentimental. Practical because the lake house only had 2 bedrooms, so Jeff and Gary took those beds automatically, leaving me the sofa. Sentimental because I had loved backyard camping as a little kid, and the idea of 30 feet of open air between me and solid walls appealed to whatever sense of bohemian adventure I thought still survived inside my 18-year-old heart. Jeff and Gary were not keen. "Dude, the couch is literally right there," Gary said, thumb jabbing toward the living room doorway. Jeff shrugged. "You want to play mountain man? Knock yourself out. Leave the patio door unlocked in case a raccoon chases your butt back inside." I laughed, thanked them, and packed what I considered the essentials. My phone, a metal water bottle, 2 small pocket knives I had been sharpening all summer, the fixed-blade combat knife my uncle gave me after graduation, a flashlight with spare batteries, and my blue mummy-style sleeping bag. The night was cloudless, gorgeous, the Milky Way smeared overhead like ground quartz. The hammock swayed between twin Douglas firs roughly 5 yards from the canvas tent and about 25 feet from the boat dock. Directly behind the hammock stood an ancient trampoline, its mat sagging with age, springs rusty in places where the sun stripped protective enamel. Jeff used to bounce there as a little kid, and was proud that the contraption still held a teen's full weight. The house itself sat a short staircase above that patio, a wooden tub of water stationed near the lower tread so people could rinse muddy feet before stepping onto the treated lumber. The tub was Jeff's grandpa's idea, a man who traded jokes freely but insisted on a spotless deck. I situated myself so the hammock curved gently under my shoulders and knees, stretched the sleeping bag across the nylon, and left the zipper partly open in case I overheated. The air temperature dipped sooner than I liked, so I tugged the bag over my chest and pictured the day to come. Breakfast. A 6-mile hike to the waterfall, maybe more swimming. The lake lapped quietly. I could picture trout beneath the surface, fins flicking in cold chambers. Somewhere after 11:30, I drifted off. When I tell people this story now, they ask if I'm certain I fell asleep, if maybe I only dreamed. I promise you, I slept. I woke sometime after midnight, groggy, blinking at a sliver of the Big Dipper above me. My phone read 12:23 a.m. It was then I registered 2 sensations at once, a discomfort in my lower back where the hammock's nylon rope pressed tighter than comfort allowed, and a vague awareness of a noise, something crisp, repetitive, like an adult stepping on dry twigs. Crunch. The sound came from the direction of the back door entrance, maybe 30 yards away. At first I assumed a deer rooting through underbrush near the trash bins Jeff warned us to keep locked. My eyelids drooped again. Crunch, crunch. This time the footfalls sounded heavier, deliberative, not the quick, uneven patter of deer hooves or the high-pitched skitter of raccoon claws. 2-footed, slow. I opened my eyes fully. The hammock swayed at the motion. I stilled it with my knees, straining to hear. The footsteps advanced, unhurried, thorough. Someone walking along the property? Jeff and Gary trying to scare me for sleeping outside? It would be on brand, especially after teasing me earlier. But the timing felt off. The steps carried weight as if the walker wore work boots. Then came the low scrape of shoe on wood. The first stair? No, a hesitation. The steps pivoted toward the trampoline. Something sat on the trampoline mat. The springs groaned tangibly, the way a human body might stretch canvas downward. My muscles tightened. The noise was wrong for Jeff or Gary. Those two were loudmouth pranksters, yes, but they would stomp or giggle. This presence sounded precise, purposeful, studying terrain. After a minute, the springs sighed again, and the shape walked away, circling clockwise behind my head, passing between me and the canvas tent. I forced myself to picture raccoons foraging in a cluster, raccoons heavy after a summer feasting on camping scraps. Yet the rationalization crumbled when I heard the being stand upright, brush against the tent's upper seam. For that contact to happen without reaching overhead, the walker had to be easily 7 feet tall, maybe more. The tent was no low-slung backpack model. It measured a full 6 feet at center height. Something enormous had walked its perimeter, trailing fingertips or claws along the nylon. An icy thought coiled in my brain. Bear, or Bigfoot, or a thrill killer wearing a dead animal pelt. My heart pumped double speed. The half-open sleeping bag zipper mocked me. I imagined lunging for my combat knife, thrashing free of the hammock's cradle, screaming for the house. But the hammock might flip. The tent could snag and slow me. Worse, the unknown visitor might decide flight meant pursuit. Crunch, crunch. The steps paused beneath the deck, right where the rinsing tub stood. Splash. A lapping noise commenced as if a tongue lapped murky water. The tub was 50% mud, insects, and pine needles from earlier hikers. Whatever drank apparently did not care. The thought of a rabid animal with its muzzle deep in polluted water chilled me. The drinking ceased, followed by silence so absolute I could hear my own blood in my eardrums. I remembered survival articles preaching immobility. Remain silent, erratic predators lose interest. Yet time crawled with no receding footfalls. Instead I felt it, something unseen, just beyond the hammock's left margin. I swore the air grew denser. A second form materialized in my peripheral vision, slinking up the house's outer wall. It mounted the deck, but its tread made no recognizable vibration. Not a bear, not a cat either. Feline movement on planks registers lighter. My mind created images. A 7-foot furless silhouette, yellowed teeth, hunter's posture. Goose flesh riddled my arms inside the bag. It happened so quietly at first that I doubted my senses. A perception, eyes fixed on me. Not curious eyes, but eyes measuring, cataloging, selecting. My nape prickled. A slow exhale escaped my nose. The hammock shifted with my heartbeat. And then, nothing. No steps, no breath. Whatever watched me held still as granite only 10 feet away. Minutes crawled. I flexed my calves one at a time, assessing whether they could propel me to the porch steps if I vaulted. I pictured grabbing the fixed blade, slashing hammock cords mid-flight, landing running. But any abrupt shift risked revealing that I was awake. Some primitive part of me insisted playing dead best mimicked prey not worth chasing. 20 minutes of deadlock passed, perhaps longer. Finally, faint friction. The shape retreating, cautious, deliberate. It circled the tent one more time, brushing knuckles across nylon, low enough that seams barely rippled. I imagined a fingertip tracing fabric height lines, verifying the lack of occupants. Then the steps aimed deeper into the trees lining the property. Each footfall grew indistinct, swallowed by damp earth beyond the clearing. Silver threads of moonlight drenched the patio again, but illuminated nothing. I did not move for what felt like another 10 minutes. When I uncurled enough to peer over the sleeping bag edge, the clearing appeared vacant, serene even, as if the visitation were invented. My back ached from tension, yet the possibility that the animal, or whatever classification fit, lurked just beyond torch beam range hardened inside my gut. Cold dew had already beaded on the nylon, soaking through my sweatshirt. The lake and stars no longer offered romance. They appeared unhelpfully distant. My first motion was painfully slow. I raised myself onto one elbow, listening. My fingertips found the combat knife's handle. I slid the blade under the zipper gap. A twist of fabric snagged again. Quiet curses bubbled in my head. After 2 tries, the zipper still refused to travel. The earlier jamming had worsened. I pictured paralyzing myself in noisy frustration, so I abandoned the zipper, instead using the knife's point to widen a slit in the bag's side seam. Quiet, careful, surgical. Cold air flooded inside. I eased one knee free, then the other. Pines towered overhead like stone pillars. Their swaying crowns whispered that wind had risen out on the lake. I rotated in the hammock, put both boot soles on the damp grass, and waited to see if anything responded. No answer. I exhaled one steady breath, rose, and tiptoed toward the wooden steps. Each tread creaked. I flinched. But the house remained silent, interior dark except for the red standby light on the living room television. If Jeff or Gary had woken due to dream or bathroom urge, they did not stir now. I wanted nothing more than to punch that sliding patio door open and dash inside. Yet some nerve in my lower back whispered. Evidence. Proof that I was not succumbing to nighttime nerves. Proof of what? A trail of paw prints? A hunk of fur? But the thought of telling Jeff's grandparents I slashed their sleeping bag, claimed a monster chased me, then refused to show a single scratch on the deck boards. It felt childish. So I turned a half circle, lifted my flashlight, and scanned. What I saw first forced a cough from my throat. Flat dents on the trampoline mat, shaped like elongated heels, positioned where a tall adult would plant both feet for balance. The sag remained, fresh enough that nylon had yet to stretch back into place. But no marks, no muddy outline trailing away. My beam slid toward the rinsing tub. Its surface still rippled. Waterlines sloshed as though small waves lapped from recent disturbance. The moon cut an ellipse across the puddle. I leaned closer. The smell of algae and hose water drifted up. A smear on the rim caught my light. Brownish, thick. I swallowed. Fur grease, blood. The chill on the back of my neck begged me to retreat. And then the flashlight died. I slapped it, an instinct learned from childhood toys. Nothing. The battery icon had glowed green an hour earlier. My skin tightened. With both hands feeling the stair rail, I pivoted, but my shin bumped the tub. Water sloshed louder. A twig popped beyond tent fabric. Once again, I fled for the house door, yanked it open, slipped inside, locked it behind me. Twist, slide, chain. I collapsed against the kitchen island, every joint trembling, lips numb. The interior smelled of burnt popcorn from the night before and sandalwood, Jeff's grandpa's signature incense. Completely ordinary and absolutely inadequate as shelter from whatever remained outside. I doused the hallway nightlight and crouched, peering through blinds. Nothing moved, but faint at first and then clearer. Branches scraped against siding on the north wall, as though something brushed limbs while pacing. I edged down the corridor, checking windows. All shut, all locked. The front door bolt stood engaged. I repeated the circuit out of paranoia, ensuring each latch held. Still, the scrape sounded every minute or two. I thought about waking Jeff, then imagined his reaction. A groggy smirk, accusations of drunken paranoia, and maybe both of us opening a door that should remain closed. So I huddled on the living room couch, knife laid across my thighs, phone clutched ready to dial 911, though reception would be spotty at best. Somewhere around 3:45 a.m., the scraping ceased. An eerie hush replaced it. I listened another half hour before exhaustion pinned my eyelids. The cabin's old refrigerator kicked on, cycling the compressor. The familiar whir felt oddly comforting. When dawn finally leaked through the east-facing windows, I rose stiff-backed. My legs quivered when I pushed aside the curtain, expecting some sign. Footprints, claw marks, anything. Grass glistened with dew, undisturbed. The hammock hung empty, swaying idly in breeze. Had I imagined the sagged trampoline, the wet tub rim? Only the frozen taste of fear convinced me the threat had been real. Jeff and Gary stumbled from their rooms around 8 a.m., squinting hungry. Gary commented on my bloodshot eyes. "Bro, you look like you spent the night under a bridge." I mumbled that the hammock got cold, so I ended up on the couch. He shrugged, poured a bowl of cereal, never suspecting I had spent 3 hours clutching a blade, scanning shadows. Jeff's grandparents arrived before noon. Big smiles, hugs, a cooler full of sweet tea. His grandpa insisted on grilling burgers for lunch. We carried supplies to the back deck. Only then did I remember the mutilated sleeping bag, my knife slit, and the jammed zipper. Heart pounding, I jogged to the tent, fearing a reprimand. What I found announced itself before the tent flap unzipped. The tent canvas bore new marks, wide grooves running diagonally, some slashes cut clean through. Inside, the sleeping bag lay shredded beyond my single incision. Feather insulation spilled in tufts, and embedded into one pillow was a single gray-brown hair, longer than any dog's I had groomed, barbed at the root. I plucked it with tweezers from my pocket knife. The strand smelled faintly of the same musky wet clay odor I remembered in the hallway. My stomach tightened. A fresh track marred the dirt outside the tent flap, a print almost human in shape, but wider, toes elongated, nails gouging soil like mini sickles. A second print overlapped, pressed deeper. They pointed toward the forest beyond the hammock. My impulse was to photograph every detail, collect samples, present evidence the way cryptid investigators preach. But fear carved a stronger command: remove all traces quickly. If Jeff's grandparents stepped outside and saw the mess, they might cancel the trip, call wildlife authorities, express anger that we had invited destruction by leaving gear unattended. Worse, they might interrogate me until I recanted, wrote the damage off as a dog's meddling. Only then I would shoulder the cost. So I zipped the tent, smashing feathers inside, and walked, knots in stomach, back to deck festivities. Jeff's grandfather flipped burgers, whistling. Jeff poured iced tea. No one noticed I had been pale. I sat, forced laughter when jokes flew. That evening, the grandparents proposed we all pitch sleeping bags on the living room floor. Old school slumber party style. They said, because thunderstorms might blow across the lake. I agreed so fast Jeff raised eyebrows. Thunder never arrived. Rain did not fall. Yet while the others snored, I lay awake, ears straining against each creak. Lightning flashed only in my imagination, illuminating titanic silhouettes pacing unseen. We stayed 4 more nights. I did not set foot outdoors after dusk. Whenever Jeff suggested a moonlit swim, I invented stomach cramps or fatigue. On the final afternoon, I claimed a half-hour alone. Hiked to the hammock, clearing without telling anyone, and buried the gray-brown hair near the tub. 20 minutes later, I tossed the shredded sleeping bag into a landfill-bound trash barrel behind a gas station 50 miles from the lake. 4 summers have passed. I have not returned to that cabin. Jeff and Gary laugh whenever Washington memories surface, ribbing me for turning Grandpa's couch into my personal fortress. They never knew about the fists clenched hours, the growl vibrating the hammock ropes. I decided silence managed risk. If the creature, whatever classification that word might hide, ever visits again, it will find someone braver or more foolish to confront it. Light filters through my bedroom blinds these days. City light immune to power outages. Sometimes after midnight, I still hear the echo of something lapping filthy water, springs groaning under weight nothing human should carry. When that happens, I grip the combat knife beneath my pillow and remind myself of the lesson carved that night. The forest keeps its own secrets, and sometimes the wisest choice is to stay inside, back turned to the star-streaked sky, pretending you never saw anything at all. I'm going to try to set everything down exactly as it happened, without skipping the small parts that might seem pointless at first, but really help explain how the night unfolded. It was spring break, just a few weeks after the clocks jumped forward, and instead of traveling anywhere exotic or even lounging around at my own house, I'd promised to stay with my best friend for the entire week. Her parents were away on business. Both of them work for a small manufacturing firm that keeps odd hours, so she didn't want the place sitting empty overnight. We've been practically attached at the hip since the 5th grade, the sort of friends who finish each other's sarcastic comments and know every embarrassing detail of one another's lives. For privacy, I'm going to call her Zoe, though that isn't her real name. Zoe's house is a 2-story place that looks older than it is, partly because her dad loves antique shutters, and partly because the original owner built using brick reclaimed from an even older colonial home a few towns over. It sits in a neighborhood that borders a patchy woodland preserve. A main road slices between the subdivision and the preserve. On one side, you've got streetlights and mailboxes. On the other, a scattering of wind-worn tombstones fenced in by black wrought iron. That cemetery, which locals call Cypress Hill, even though the sign at the gate reads St. Bartholomew's Rest, was founded in the late 1800s and then expanded in the 1930s. It feels out of place, as if someone plucked it from a much more rural county and set it down at the edge of suburbia. Until that night, I always walked past it without more than a passing shiver. The first night of break ran exactly the way you would expect when two girls finally get to hog an entire house. We raided Netflix, painted our nails ridiculous colors, tried on outfits from Zoe's closet, and laughed until our stomachs hurt. Nothing even close to supernatural. We collapsed around 2 in the morning and slept until noon. The next day moved at the same easy pace. Sleep late, binge junk TV, text friends, until dinner time rolled around, which is when we both realized the cupboards were practically bare. Zoe's mom had stocked the freezer, but somehow missed normal snack food. Seeing as we'd skipped lunch and were too lazy to thaw chicken or make real pasta, we decided we'd hoof it to the 24-hour convenience store 3 blocks away. I grabbed $20 from the small stash in the zipper pocket of my weekender bag, and Zoe pulled a crumpled 10 and a few singles off her desk. We both threw on sweats, pulled hoodies over our tees, slipped into beat-up sneakers, and headed downstairs. Zoe locked the front door out of habit. Then we went through the side entrance that squeaks whenever the weather dips below 40 degrees. By the time my foot hit the driveway, I felt something in my gut, like the moment in a roller coaster queue when you hear the cars clank to a stop overhead and your brain whispers that you aren't as brave as you pretend. I shrugged it off, but the skin on my shoulders crawled. It felt like eyes were on us. Nothing visible, just a weight pressing between the shoulder blades. Zoe noticed me speeding up even before I mentioned it. "What's your hurry?" she asked, half laughing. I tried to joke that someone probably invented nacho-flavored potato chips while we were procrastinating, and I wanted to taste them before the store sold out, but she must have sensed I needed something more. Without teasing, she increased her pace to match mine. We made it to the corner, crossed the little feeder street, and stepped onto the main sidewalk. Usually the traffic hum masks small sounds, but that night the road felt weirdly deserted. One of those high moon, no wind moments when you hear your own lungs more than you hear engines. Headlights glimmered in the distance, then slipped out of view behind hedges, leaving us wrapped in a hush too complete for the edge of a suburb. When the convenience store bell dinged above the door, I breathed easier. We talked loudly, laughing about stupid memes while we prowled the aisles. We loaded our arms with junk food, purple bag Doritos, 2 bottles of neon sports drink, a king-size Kit Kat, and a sleeve of iced oatmeal cookies because Zoe swore they tasted better than chocolate chip. We paid, thanked the guy at the counter, and pushed back into thick night air. Zoe flipped the plastic sack so it hung over her shoulder, and the crinkle sounded like someone shredding tissue paper in church, way too loud. I told her to keep it down, joking that she'd attract raccoons. We were halfway across the parking lot when I heard it, a stick cracking. The sound came from the graveyard side of the road. I glanced left and spotted the silhouette of that big dead tree near the cemetery fence, its top limbs jagged like uneven lightning bolts. Beneath its lowest branch, a twig snapped again, sharper, as if someone or something shifted weight. I froze. Zoe must have felt the tension ripple off me because she pivoted too. Time gets weird in moments like that. My first thought was somebody playing a prank, maybe older kids hiding between headstones waiting for cars to pass so they could spook pedestrians. Then I saw her. At least I thought it was a her. The figure perched among the branches didn't move the way a living person moves. She looked stiff, almost brittle. Flicking my eyes up the trunk, I took in details I could have lived without. Hair matted into clumps, strands crusted to what remained of scalp. Flesh sagging, charred black on one side, blister pink on the other. Deep eye sockets that should have held eyeballs but did not. And then the grin. It cut across her bottom face from cheekbone to cheekbone, lips burned away or removed, exposing teeth that shone dull in street lamp glare. The grin seemed too wide for a normal human jaw, like someone had grabbed both corners of her mouth and pulled until tendons tore. At first, I convinced myself she had to be a leftover Halloween prop, a prop that somehow survived wind and winter storms since October. But the moment that notion formed, she twitched. Her burned neck tilted, joints popping like stiff hinges. The jaw lowered farther, as if unhinging. And then came a noise so brutal it vibrated my sinuses, a dry, high shriek that carried no words but spoke pure violence. Zoe dropped the chip bag and screamed. I yelled too, a raw note that scraped my throat. When the woman extended one arm, joints cracking. I didn't wait to see if she intended to climb down or leap. I seized Zoe's wrist and ran. Every volleyball sprint drill we'd ever cursed gave us the extra half step we needed. Our sneakers slapped pavement. Behind us, the tree bark rattled as she either scrambled down or launched herself forward. I risked glancing back, and in that fraction of a second, I can still replay it, I saw no figure perched inside the branches, but something rounded the corner of the fence at shadow speed, unseen directly, glimpsed only as movement snuffing moonlight like smothered candles. We tore around the cul-de-sac, cut the corner across a dormant flower bed, and stormed straight for my house because it was closer than Zoe's. I fumbled under the gnome statue at the porch step, found the hidden key my dad always hides there, threw myself against the door and twisted the knob. Zoe shoved in behind me. I slammed the door, rammed the family room table against it, then slid to the floor gasping. A split second later, the door rattled from an impact. A second bang followed, harder. Zoe whimpered, hands over her ears. I shouted for her to dial 911, and she did, voice shaking into the phone as she tried to explain that we were alone. Minors being attacked by a woman who looked, she stuttered, like a corpse. While she recited our address, I sprinted upstairs for the backup handgun my mom keeps unloaded but accessible. Mom is ex-military and believes layered defense is smarter than trusting cops to arrive quickly. I grabbed the lockbox from her closet shelf, fumbling the 4-digit code twice before the lid popped. Inside lay the .38, 2 speed strips loaded with hollow points. I jammed 6 rounds into the cylinder, forced the cylinder shut, and raced back down. The banging had stopped. Zoe faced the door, shoulders hunched. She still clutched the phone. I whispered that the police were on the way and repeated Mom's rule. If you draw, you must be willing to use. I raised the pistol with 2 hands, breath steadying the way Dad taught me at the range. Through the peephole, I saw nothing. Empty porch, no motion. But that didn't settle me. The porch light flickered, leaving intermittent washouts. The sidewalk beyond lay in shadow. Zoe sobbed quietly, tears streaking cheeks. I pressed my forehead against the doorframe. I felt the grain of wood through my bangs and forced myself to think. Did I actually intend to shoot? And what exactly? A disfigured woman? A backward bent mannequin? Before I reached a conclusion, Zoe's breath hitched and she pointed at the tiny semicircle of stained glass over the door. I followed her gaze. Twin black sockets peered from the window's lower corner. The woman crouched on our porch roof. She grinned directly at us, charred lips peeled back, burnt skin tight across cheeks. I cried out something wordless, and adrenaline surged so hard my ears rang. I yanked the door open and fired. I didn't aim for center mass. Panic overrode training. I aimed for the head because the grin demanded punishment. The revolver barked. The recoil punched wrists. The slug shattered glass, passed through. I swung again and fired twice more. Glass rained. Tiny shards pinged hardwood. Zoe screamed behind me. I stepped onto the porch, barrel leveled. The roof was empty. Shingles creaked once, faint, then nothing. 15 seconds later, the first police cruiser screeched up the street. Another followed. 2 officers spilled out, hands on holsters, shouting commands. They found me standing barefoot on my own porch, pointing a gun at the eave. One yelled for me to drop the weapon, so I complied, sliding it across the deck with the barrel pointed away. They cuffed me anyway, forced Zoe to sit on the steps while they swept the property. All they found were footprints in the mud by the flower bed, and those prints were mine and Zoe's. No other marks on shingles or wood. No sign of forced entry or tools. The officers grew suspicious of our story within minutes, radioing an ambulance because they thought we might be on drugs. Zoe and I gave statements 3 separate times while EMTs checked our pupils. Eventually they accepted we weren't tripping, but concluded we must have scared off a flesh and blood intruder. Though why an intruder would mutilate themselves to that degree remained unanswered. My parents arrived, furious and panicked. After 2 more hours of neon-lit questions at the police station, they booked me for unlawful discharge